Hello and welcome back to the Music History Project. This week's episode is going to be all about music publishing. Welcome to the Music History Project. We're your hosts. I'm Elizabeth Dale.
And Dan Del Fiorentino.
And Mike Mullins.
All of our content comes from the Oral History Program, which is sponsored by NAMM, the National Association of Music Merchants. And that is a program that is over 3,000 interviews and constantly growing. If you want to check out any of our content or any of the other interviews that aren't featured, please check out our website at www.namm.org/library. Hey, thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be focusing on music publishing, kind of a very specific focus in terms of we're going to be hearing stories from people who were kind of inspired firsthand, whether they were publishing music for a specific project or perhaps they were a music teacher and listening to their students be inspired, help them develop method books, those kind of firsthand accounts of, the boots on the ground.
And throughout the podcast today, we're going to hear from a couple of celebrity songwriters as well. Richard Sherman of the Sherman Brothers, who brought us a ton of great hits for the Disney institution, and Ray Parker Jr., who gave us Ghostbusters. And we're going to start off with a gentleman that you probably know very well, many of his popular songs starting in the 70s and all the way up until recently. But along the way, as Elizabeth said, we're going to pop in a few of the music publishers, some of the folks who ran music publishing companies, and then some of the authors of very popular method books that have inspired a whole generation of folks to play music. So we're excited to kind of weave this story together and hopefully inspire a little bit too. This first story, if I can just jump right into it, is Paul Williams talking about working with Jim Henson and writing a song for Kermit the Frog. And what I love about it is that there is some great inspirational pep talk kind of going on with this and some great ideas to just sort of generally be inspired by listening to this.
So here's Paul Williams talking about writing The Rainbow Connection.
I went to England to do the Muppet Show, in the first season of the Muppet Show, and I was a huge fan of Henson's. I mean, before I knew they were Muppets, I loved, on Ed Sullivan, he had dancing slinkies and a monster that sang, I've grown accustomed to your face, while he disassembled his face, whatever. An early version of Rolf the Dog on the Jimmy Dean Show. I loved everything Jim Henson did from the moment I saw his work. And when we met in London, there was just an immediate connection. He said, we're going to do a project for HBO called Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas. And it's a little Christmas story about a family of otters and all, and would you be interested in writing the music for it, the songs? I said, yeah, so I wrote the songs for that. Still a favorite project. Very low tech. You can see the strings on the marionettes, But we got along great, and after that, he said, we're now going onto the big screen with the Muppet movie. Would you write the songs for the Muppet movie? And I said, yes, but let me bring in Kenny Asher. Kenny and I had just written the songs for A Star Is Born, almost all of them except for Evergreen that I wrote with Barbara. But I wrote most of the songs with Kenny Asher. I said he has a great classical sound to his melodies. They are as classy as Kermit and Piggy deserve. So I brought Kenny Asher in. We met at my house in the Hollywood Hills and sat there and talked about what the movie was going to be about. Okay, it's going to be a road picture about how the Muppets get together, how they go to Hollywood. Why are they going to Hollywood? Because there's a search on for frogs that want to become rich and famous. Good, write that down. So I said, where do we start? He said, well, we start with Kermit sitting in the swamp and on a lily pad. I said, okay, it turned out to be a log because it's easier to hide Jim in a log than a lily pad. But what's he doing? And Jim thought a minute and he went, he's playing the banjo. I went, of course he is, right? And so Kenny and I sat down to write this first song, and one of the great conversations ever was walking to the car with Jim. And I said, we won't leave you in the dark on this. As we're working on the songs, Kenny, and I'll show them to you. And Jim said, oh, that's all right. I'll hear them in the studio when we record them, which was a display of trust that where do you go to find that in the world today? that I trust you to write the right song, and Kenny and I did. We gave him the Rainbow Connection, and what we basically thought was, okay, this frog is first of all, this is every frog. This is Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life. This is in the midst of the tornado. This is the sensible, calm guy that's trying to just stay connected and lead people. He's not up to the task, but he's up to the task. He's Kermit the Frog. He's got water, he's got air, he's got light. What does he have? He has rainbows. He has the refresh. So it just started to roll out of us. Why are there so many songs about rainbows? What's on the other side? Rainbows are visions, but only illusions. Rainbows have nothing to hide. And we went, oh, now we've done it. We've written ourselves into a corner where we've taken all the magic out of rainbows, So we have to turn it around. So we've been told, and some choose to believe it. I know they're wrong, wait and see. Someday we'll find it. Da-dee-da-da-da-ba, they're lovers, the dreamers, and me, and we couldn't figure out what it was. We're sitting with my then wife at the time, Kenny and I, and Katie was putting dinner on the table for us. She said, you guys have been going da-da-da-da-da for hours. What's going on? I said, we're looking for the connection to the rainbow. There's a rainbow connection of how this whole thing, we can't figure it out. She said, you're looking for a rainbow connection. And we went, a rainbow connection? She said, yeah, that's what you just called it. I went, that's what we just called it. We ran and wrote, someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and me. My favorite line in the song is, who said that every wish would be heard and answered, of wished on a morning star? Somebody thought of that, and someone believed it. Look what it's done so far. The implication is that we all have great power. There's power in your thoughts. At the end of the movie, we did a rewrite of a bit of it. Life's like a movie, write your own ending. Keep believing, keep pretending. We've done just what we set out to do. Thanks to the lovers, the dreamers, and you. I think it's a song that honors the questions more than the answers. And I think it's a song that empowers the listener. That if you believe in something enough, if you believe enough, that you just might pull it off. You just might do what we were able to do, thanks to the lovers, the dreamers, and you. The continuing success of the Muppets is due to the love of the fans. So if you're a Muppet fan, you're a part of their success and a part of mine. So thank you.
That was Paul Williams talking about writing the Rainbow Connection for Kermit the Frog, and that brought back a lot of unique childhood memories for myself.
Definitely one of those songs that you heard a lot as a kid.
I can just picture Kermit riding the bicycle and playing the banjo in my head right now. So we're going to move right along to our next guest, who's going to be Mark Gibson, who is a music publisher based out of Australia.
I don't like to be too critical. Most of the tutor books that come from North America are basically all the same. They're different around the edges and they look a bit different, but in terms of methodology, they're pretty much the same. And my theory is that's because publishers basically have control, what goes out there. So they've got a lot of input onto what people teach and how they teach, and they're not going to take any big risks, because if people have been doing it that way for goodness knows how many years, does anyone really want to take the risk of changing it? Because you lose your customer base. Whereas we're quite the opposite, because we're the new kid on the block. We basically have to be different because we can't compete on price. We wanted to be different anyway. So our whole methodology is quite different to others in that music is a language, and all language starts with listening, and then you start speaking it, and reading and writing comes much later. So in other words, you do it, and then you sort of learn about how you did it, how you knew what to do, the whole mother tongue approach, which is basically the Suzuki idea. So our methodology includes Suzuki ideas, Dalcroze, Orff, Kodai, Yamaha method, some traditional elements, and you put it all together and you get our encore approach. So we also use a lot of body percussion because the engine room of music is rhythm. And it doesn't matter which music style you go to, you're going to find it's rhythm. Yeah, just about every tutor book, doesn't matter what instrument it is, they're all mostly to do with pitch. And then, after they've taught people pitch, it's like, now we have to organise these notes. You've got to play in time. It's time to count. But counting doesn't actually give you the rhythm. Counting just says, look, this is the beat. But notes can come before the beat, after the beat. You can have several notes on one beat. Rhythm is something apart from counting. And counting is only one way to learn rhythm. So I'd say that what makes us very different is the way we teach rhythm, the fact that we treat rhythm as number one, because the notes have to be organised, and it's the rhythmic groove that almost determines style. So to teach rhythm, we do a lot of body percussion. We use props such as rainbow rings, streamers, parachutes, as well as percussion instruments. But it's got to start with body percussion. Rhythm's something that you have to feel. And then once you've done it and feel it, then you can say, oh, this is the notation, this is what it looks like, this is what you did. Then it's like, well, the notes. Well, if you're teaching piano or keyboard, it's so easy because it's in front of you. They're like pictures. So we use a lot of keyboard mats. So we do a lot of modelling on mats. And if you've got mats, that means you can put dots and Velcro dots on them, so you can bring the whole thing to life, so children can model what they're going to play before they play it. That means before they play a piece, they can do it through body percussion. You can reinforce that through a prop. You can also play it on percussion instruments. You can show them where the notes live on the keyboard. You can then show them the technique just on a keyboard mat. So when they actually go to play it, they actually know the whole piece. So from the first time they actually play it on an instrument, it sounds great. Now that's the big difference between us and traditional approaches. Traditional approaches is like they'll keep working at it on the instrument until it sounds good. We'll have it already sounding good before they touch the instrument. And yet it all happens in the one lesson. So it's all about getting those teaching steps in the right sequence. And so it puts a very positive spin on the way we teach. Because a lot of teaching is sometimes the opposite, where the student doesn't get it right, then the teacher's always trying to fix it up. And after a while, you can get into a rut like that, where it can become a little bit negative. Because we do it the other way, we set everybody up to be successful. And of course, we know that not everybody's going to be successful the first time, but we've set a framework that's going to make it easy to sort things out. And it also sets a framework where the teacher becomes more diagnostically attuned to, okay, if it doesn't work for this student, why didn't it? Did I leave out a teaching step? Or is there something that this child doesn't quite get? Is there a coordination issue I haven't thought about? So it really does sort of change the whole paradigm. And because we've got all these different things in the learning process, you can't put that in the student book. It'll be too cluttered. So that's where our method is quite different in our book. So we decided that the student book has to look like a book that the students are going to love. There's no need to put any information there for the teachers. It's got to be there for the students. It's their book. So therefore we've got separate teacher guides. And the thing about by having a separate teacher guide, that gives us a lot of flexibility, because we'll keep inventing new ways to teach. We'll keep getting new ideas. That means the student book can virtually stay the way it is, but the teacher guide can keep evolving. There are some creative teachers out there can add extra layers to that, and we're very happy for them to do so. And in fact, I've picked up some of their ideas, because I just love working with creative people who say, wow, I thought of doing this with the book. But I've found that the younger the age group, the more challenging it is for absolutely everybody. Because you can teach young children almost anything. You just have to figure out how to do it. That's the real challenge.
So once again, that was Mark Gibson talking about music publishing in Australia. And next up, we're going to hear from Charlou Roberts. And she is a accomplished method book author and has written many method books over the years. And she's going to be talking about her approach to writing method books and the process behind each book she writes.
Everybody kind of says the same thing. There's hundreds and hundreds of method books out there, but they are somehow lacking in the way people are teaching something. And I had to become a teacher myself to understand what they meant. And now that I'm teaching, I kind of go, oh yeah, that's a great book. I can use that with this student, but it doesn't teach this. Or this is missing from the method. Or, gosh, why do they do this so quick? They have the kids moving their hand position down to C from the middle C position so quickly, and there could have been at least 20 more pages of songs for them to develop at, especially like the 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds. They need a little bit more. So I have to go out and buy another book to be able to reinforce that for longer. And so I find myself that there's so many pieces missing from what I want to teach, and I have to go to several books to get it all in. And I know a lot of other piano teachers, music teachers, guitar teachers, whatever, are finding the same things. I work with guitar teachers and a lot of other instrument teachers where at the school that I teach at. And everybody kind of says the same thing. There's always things missing from any methodology. So I understand these people that have been teaching their whole lives and want to get something more cohesive out there. And and they've been doing their printouts and they've been doing their whatever, copying other people's books and printouts. They've been putting things together, piecing them together their whole lives. And so, yeah, they've got great ideas, but they haven't got a clue how to put an actual book together and know what to do with it and getting it out to the world so that other people could learn by it or teach through it or anything else. Maybe have an additional income on the side, as they retire. They might have, they want to have kind of a little money on the side because they've been teaching. They want to pass that information on to other teachers, and and they hope to make the cost back. It's hard though. The majority of my work for Hal Leonard and Warner Brothers was guitar and bass and other fretted instruments, because that's where the money was. When Tab got out there and all those old books had to be kind of redone but put in with Tab. But let's face it, every 12-year-old boy in LA wants to be a rock star when they grow up and play guitar. So it wasn't as much the piano books or the saxophone books or anything else. It was strictly guitar, and those have changed substantially all the years. But they've gotten slicker, and I can't say that necessarily. I mean, some of the Hal Leonard method that I did back in the 90s, and I did a huge series of those. That was always cool too, when they'd give me a series, and I'd do like 8 books in a series. So it was job security, and I could use the same template and pump it out for the guitar book or the mandolin book in the same look, or I even did a book on oud. So awesome. Banjo, all these different instruments, but we could do a series like that. But those books in the 90s are still they're major sellers now.
So that was Charlou Roberts, and what's really neat to me is that a lot of the behind-the-scenes authors, editors, folks who are working in the publishing companies are women, and that's always been the case, going way back to the beginning of Tin Pan Alley and some of the music publishers out of New York. A lot of women have always been involved, and I think it's really neat that we've had the opportunity to document some of these stories. We have another one coming up a little bit later on in this podcast, and to me, it just echoes the fact that this has never changed. This has always been the way it is, and I think only recently, maybe the last 30 years or so, have some of these women actually have gotten the credibility, or the credit rather, that they deserve. And for many years, maybe there would only be an initial next to the person's name, so you wouldn't know it was Charlou. You would just know it was C. Roberts. So it could be a man or a woman. So those little changes have made a big difference, obviously, in getting recognition. But I just love the fact that listening to her, you can tell her passion and her drive and her inspiration, and that is to make the best product possible to encourage more people to become music makers. And I really do think that has a lot to do with the passion of all these guys that we're listening to at this podcast. A lot of drive, a lot of inspiration from just the simple process of wanting to encourage someone to be a music maker.
So next up, we're going to hear from Keith. Hey, Dan, why don't you give us some background about him?
So Keith Mardak was one of the first folks to get a special award that we created called the Oral History Service Award for his help with the NAMM interview program. And just a few years ago, he also received the coveted Dorothy Award, which is presented by RPMDA, which is the Print Music Dealers Association. And so to tell you this guy has been active in all elements of the industry is sort of an understatement. He began in the 1960s in a small music publishing company, and later was able to purchase what is now the biggest music publishing company in the United States, probably the world, Hal Leonard. And along the way, he's never forgotten the roots. He really loves the history. He cares very much about the employees and is always focused on creating new product, again, to encourage other people. And I really appreciate this particular segment that Mike found for us in his interview. I think it was Mike. Am I giving you the right credit?
Maybe.
Okay.
I'll take it. I don't know.
Okay, take it. So this is Keith Mardek from his NAMM Oral History interview. How do you see Zeb's role in the industry? What sort of things did he provide?
Well, Zeb was the ultimate entrepreneur, the ultimate innovator. I went to work for him in 1963, I believe, or 62, as an organ teacher, a part-time job. By day, I was a draftsman. I was an engineering student. And Zeb became the largest single-store seller of pianos and organs in the world, basically. He sold over 1,000 units out of one location back then. Phenomenal. And he was a heavy promoter, and one concept he came up with was giving away an educational package with the sale of every instrument. He valued it at $100. And primarily it was free lessons, valued at $3, and he paid the teacher $1 to teach it. I had a lot of those dollar students. And he gave away 8 free lessons, and $76 worth of pointer system books from Hal Leonard. And that was the package. Well, soon everybody else in town could duplicate that. So he decided he wanted something that no one else could offer. And he gathered us teachers and a few salespeople together one night, and he had this vision for a package of music, a bunch of song sheets. So we bought what's called a music writer back then, typewriter that was converted to music notes. And we started arranging songs, public domain songs, and we ended up with 112 songs. Zeb put a price, 45 cents, 50 cents, 60 cents, depending on the song. Put it in a plastic bag, still gave away the 8 free lessons, but he lowered his costs dramatically because buying the $76 worth of pointer system books cost him half, probably, $37, $38, and he could print this course for much less, or a package of music. So he started to give that away, and no competitor could duplicate it quickly. Thomas Organ Company brought their biggest dealers to Puerto Rico, and each of the dealers had the opportunity to explain how they sold organs, what made them successful. When it was Zeb's turn, he pulled out his package and he explained how he used it, and all of the dealers said, "Oh, can I buy that from you? It's fantastic, and I'm not in your market, so I wouldn't be competing with you." And he said, "Sure." They said, "How much is it?" And he said, $20. Costing him 10. So one dealer took 500, one took 200, and so forth. And he came back with a bundle of orders and a ton of money, and he suddenly was exposed to the publishing world. But he didn't quite know what to do with it exactly, so he took it to the president of Thomas and said, "Why don't you just buy this from me, pay me a royalty, and use it for all your dealers?" And he said, "Nah, I don't want to do that." So then Zeb took it to Wurlitzer. He was also a Wurlitzer dealer. And they said, "Nah." Then he took it to Hal Leonard. And they said no. So finally, he just decided it wasn't viable. But later that year, he was at a Wurlitzer dealer meeting, and they unveiled what they call the hobby lesson course. And they ripped him off. But they made it into a course with teaching manuals and copyrighted songs. It was pretty nice. Well, that upset him. So he decided to really get into the publishing business in a significant way, and he redesigned the course. I was given the task of writing manuals, putting the songs in some sequence educationally. We dressed it up and put it in a box and went into the 1965 trade show and sold it on a franchise basis to hopefully the biggest dealer in each city. And I was still a teacher. I went to the show and walked into the room. It was at the Palmer House. And Zeb saw me and he said, "Come on in and just talk to people. Just hold them. We can't get to them all. Stay overnight." So I stayed overnight, and I just started to help them out and talking to people and explaining the course. Got back from the show, And the fellow that was going to run the publishing division, a fellow named John Schema, was a salesman on the floor for Zeb. So I met with Zeb after the show, and I said, I'd like to apply for John's job on the floor. And he said, I don't think you're a salesman, but we need somebody in the publishing thing to help Johnny. So I said, all right. I said, what do you pay me? He said, what are you making being a draftsman? I said, $550 a month. He said, I'll give you $500. So I took the job for $500 a month. And the publishing thing really grew substantially, and that's when Zeb came back, and he sold the retail stores, came back into publishing. And we had a nice 5 run. We went from zero to about $3.5 million in sales when I left. It was a unfortunate parting. I know I hurt Zeb's feelings at the time, and I didn't mean to, but I was his guy, and I left him. But we got back together socially, and some years later, and actually in I think I'll run together. I think 1991, I bought his company, Sight and Sound, and he retired. Well, I bought half, the music book side, and again, innovation. He created what are called the sound storybooks, which are books with keyboards on them, and you could play little songs and things. And he sold that to Western Publishing and got a lot of money on that sale. Western has since gone. We're still here.
So again, that was Keith Mardak, kind of a music publishing institution these days. So we're really lucky to have him part of the collection. And as always, you can hear Keith's interview as well as any others you hear today in the podcast by visiting our website, which is at www.namm.org/library. And so now we got to ask Mike a very important question. For our next interview, Mike, who are you going to call?
Well, the correct answer would be Ghostbusters, but in this case, we're going to call the writer of that, Ray Parker Jr.
What a cool interview. Like, as a kid of the late 80s, early 90s who grew up watching all the Ghostbuster flicks, it's real cool to see that as part of our collection. So here's Ray.
Rising with Stevie Wonder.
And you played on a cup for him in 72, I believe.
Yeah. Well, I went on tour with him and played. He wanted me to join his band. He called me up on the phone. I don't know how he got my phone number. He says, this is Stevie Wonder. I hung up the phone, 4 or 5 times and said some words that I shouldn't mention on the air. I thought it was one of my friends joking around with me because music on my mind I thought was a masterpiece. It's still, to me, the greatest album I've ever heard. And I just knew somebody was jerking me around, He says, no, this is really Stevie Wonder. I heard about you, and, I want you to come on tour with me. And he said, we keep getting disconnected, though. And so he said, this is really me. Stop hanging up the phone. So he played me the rhythm track to Superstition. And that's how I knew it was him.
Oh, he played it?
He had just started, yeah. So he played on the phone for me. He says, here, listen to this. So he played me a little bit of it on the phone. I was like, oh, my gosh, I've been hanging up on Stevie Wonder. So I think I was just turning 18 years old, and he wanted me to come to San Francisco first, and we were going to work on an album for Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. Then we were going to go to L.A., do the Talking Book album, overdub some of that, and then we did some more Electric Lady in New York. And then we were going on tour with the Rolling Stones. So I dropped out of college. I went to college early. I was in a year early anyway because I graduated early, and that was a big conversation with my dad. What are we going to do? And this is a point in my life where you can either go, and a lot of musicians out there that are listening to this, I'm sure they've had this same experience. Because, music, you don't have to make any money. You can be broke. Everybody tells you how stupid you are, till you need a backup plan and all the rest of this stuff. And in my opinion, if you're a true musician, you're not hearing that. You got to burn the backup plan. There is no backup plan. If God blessed you or cursed you, however you want to look at it, with this musical gift, it's just something you got to do. It's just there is no sideways or anything. So for me, I had to explain to my dad that it's your dream that you want me to work at Ford and build car parts and get a pension and welfare plan and security and get a paycheck and all that. I just wanted to play the music. So I told him I had to go with my heart. I wanted to play the music. So he finally understood that and let me go. Wow. And that's when I just dropped the books, walked out of college, and never returned.
Wow. And then...
Now, it wasn't a bad choice, too, going on tour with the Rolling Stones and Stevie Wonder. If you're going, that's a good way to go. Yeah.
Get a decent gig in front of you there.
Yeah, but it was a nice experience for me because Stevie Wonder personally taught me how to write songs. And he listened to the little clips of things that I was playing around with, and he said, well, you can do that and do this. And next thing you know, I was writing songs, which I did. And while I was in L.A., I'll never forget, I was at Spago's looking across the street, and there was a black billboard with a circle on it. I was like, what the heck that is, Well, little did I know, later that day, somebody called me up, my friend Gary LaMelle, who I worked with Barry White. That's where the connection comes in. So everything ties together, right? And he called me up. He says, I got this film that I want you to do. He says, you may have seen these billboards around town. They're just black, and they put a circle out. He says, now next week they're going to put the ghost in. Then the film comes out. He says, we ain't got no music, right? I think, oh, yeah, I saw that thing from Smart. He says, you got to write this. He says, I think you're the right guy to write the song for this film. He says, let me show you the film. And they told me they hired a million people to write the song. They weren't happy with anything they got. And he says, because the director wants the words Ghostbusters in the song. It's not fair because you've heard my version of it now, but that's a really hard word to sing. Ghostbusters. I mean, no matter how you do it, it doesn't come out right, And so I told him that I really wasn't working anymore. He says, well, what are you doing in L.A.? I said, I'm doing this. Just where you working there? And I think the offer at that time was he said, I'll give you $50,000, spend 2 or 3 days, think about it. And if we don't like the music, keep the money, right? It was only 20 seconds of music in a certain little scene, but of course I'm a musician, I can't do 20 seconds, so I did 1.5 minutes of music, which I thought was way too much. And came up with that little jingle, little concept, played it for the director. He woke me up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning after I had no sleep for 2 or 3 days in a row. And he says, I love it. Can we make it a record? And then he was just going on. He had taken a cassette and flown it into the 35 millimeter mag. This is Ivan Reitman, and he just loved it. And then he really propelled the whole thing. He said, we need to make a record. Let's do this, let's do that. And it just kind of grew from there.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the story of who you going to call,
What I love about Ray Parker Jr. is that he makes no bones about the fact that he knows everybody on the planet knows that song. That's what is so cool. And he just kind of strolls around the NAMM show, and people come up and want to have a picture or whatnot, and he rolls with it. And as you could tell in the clip there, he loves talking about it. It's a neat chapter in his life, and I think it's really cool to have that as part of our collection.
My favorite was when I was organizing Dan's CD collection, maybe about 6 months ago or something like that, for our archives here. There was one signed by Ray from, I'm assuming you got it signed when you did the interview with him.
Yeah.
And he's got the Ghostbusters song on it, like 6 different versions. So he really embraces it, which is so awesome, because a lot of times when you see guys who kind of have like one big claim to fame,
right,
really resent it,
and never want to play it or talk about it.
Yeah. So I think it's really cool, because that's what people want to hear. They want to hear him, ask them who they're going to call and yell Ghostbusters and stuff like that. So, okay, we're going to move right along to another method book author, Jane Bastian. And Jane just passed away this year?
Yeah, Jane lived in La Jolla, California, and worked with the Chose Music Company down there, and really provided, along with her husband, some amazing method books, mostly for piano. And what I really like about this clip that's actually not part of her web clip, but another segment from her interview, is sort of the real human side of it. She's talking a little bit about when she had kids and some other people that she was working with had kids. They had to lug them around, and they were trying to do these concerts and trying to promote her books, and the kids were crawling around. And I don't know, to me, it puts a more human face to that very famous name that you see on all those method books. I grew up seeing her name on my mom's piano bench, and it's kind of cool to have the opportunity to have interviewed her. And now that she's passed away, it's neat to remember the impact that she had. In addition to the method book, she was also quite a music advocate. She went around to schools, churches, and community groups all over the place, promoting not just her method book, but how important music and music education is to each community. So for her efforts, I tip my hat to her. And let's play this clip in memory of Jane Bastian.
My husband was much more of a performing artist than I was at that time, and he loved to perform. And so he was always pushing me to practice, to get with it and learn the pieces and so on. Anyway, we played 2 pianos. And we started that way, and we would have to give faculty recitals both at Tulane, and then later, a couple of years later, he went over to Loyola because the main piano position was open there. And that was Loyola College of Music, which was actually a music school. And so anyway, we would have to give recitals at both colleges each year. So we would prepare these recitals and play them. And then he decided he would work on a doctorate. And so he went to the University of Michigan in the summer. And I went also, and I thought that I might take some piano lessons. But I just decided I didn't really want to take piano lessons there. What I really wanted to do was to write a book that I could use for my students. And so I spent my time doing that, and he worked toward the doctorate. And then I came out with the books. Well, then that's when I met Neil. I was looking for somebody to copy the book. And a lady at the music store in Ann Arbor told me, she said, the Midwest Band Clinic is going on over at the university. She said, why don't you go over there and see if you could find Don Gillis, who was going to copy the music for me. But he had just gotten married, et cetera, and wasn't available. But anyway, when I walked in, there was Neil Chose. And I had known him in college. We had gone to school together. And so he said, so what are you doing? And I said, I've written a book, and I'm trying to get somebody to copy it so that my students can read it, and I want to try it out and see how it works and so on. And he said, I'll help you with it. And so I started putting together pages that we did it on a mimeograph machine, a Xerox machine in those days. And he put out a little book, just with the simple binding and so on. And I used it for a year and then started revising. And then in 1963, my first book came out, which was Pre-Reading Experiences. And it was just the way I taught, basically, at that time. And so then 2 or 3 other books came out. Then we all started having babies. I had a baby. Neil and Barbara had a baby. I had another baby, etc. But in the meantime, my husband decided that he would not do the doctorate, that instead he would write technique books to go along with my books. And so he got started in this, and he really, really liked it. He was really good at organizing all the material, and he loved to cut and paste and figure out how it would go on the page, and he was really patient, and also he was just a workaholic. I mean, he did it every single day for a certain number of hours, and then he went and played tennis in the afternoon. And so that was his life at that point. And so then Neil said, well, I really think you should do some workshops. So I had a baby at that time, and I could just remember that we took the mother and 2 students that I was teaching, and we went to Dallas. We went first to San Antonio to Southern Music, and then we went to Dallas, Whittles, and then we went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we did 3 workshops. We had the mother, who was a nurse, taking care of our baby. We took her. It was just a scene. And, I was worried about what was happening, and half the night we were up and so on with the baby, but the mother was with her kids. And then these students demonstrated and showed what they had learned and so on. So that was sort of our first workshop, and we showed our books. And that was the beginning. I always end my workshops, and I really do this honestly every day, by thinking, I just hope that I can teach every child as though he were my very best student. And then he can use it for whatever he needs to. And then we can sleep at night, right? I can sleep at night without feeling guilty. But I do think it's important because, I mean, music plays such a big part in kids' lives. The discipline of it, the doing it right, the 1, 2, 3, how to learn. You're learning it on a one-to-one basis with one person over a long period of time. You don't have to change every year. A lot of the students I teach for 12 years and all the way through, And it's a different kind of relationship. So Now my big thing is when I go to New York to visit my daughter at Thanksgiving, there's loads of our students that are back there, and they can't come home for Thanksgiving, so they come to New York, and we all have a big dinner, and that's a lot of fun. So it's really been a great life.
So once again, that was Jane Bastian. It's always good hearing from her. And next up, we are going to hear from Brian Bradley, who was actually the president of Alfred and is currently the president of JBL. And Brian does a good job of talking about how important the publishing industry is still to this day, and how, even with changes in technology, how publishing will stay relevant in the years to come. So here's Brian.
Music publishing is a great business. In fact, even more than audio, it's probably my favorite part of our business, because it's really the heart of it. It's where everything else starts. I mean, we can make great audio gear, Fender, Gibson can make a great guitar, whatever, but that's just a paint color. The actual portrait that gets created is what that music publishing represents. You know what I mean? It's the heart of it all. And so, I think it's unfortunate the way we treat those rights holders and those creative people. I mean, I think they kind of get the short end of the stick, though I believe that's changing, because now that with the way people consume music through downloads, through the fan base sort of being, it's now direct from that artist to the fan base, really. So that publishing there is about as close to the artist as you can get, in terms of the songwriter. So they're really, I think, going to benefit from that relationship as that goes forward. If they can keep fighting for the rights in Congress and stuff, they deserve. But I love that business, and I think technology only helps it. I remember when I was at Alfred, one of the things a lot of people would say was, "Well, you guys are doing print, and don't you think that at that time the iPad and all of this is going to kill your business, right? No one's buying a book anymore. You just get a download." And I said, well, actually, I'd look at it the other way. I think every time the iPad or another technology platform comes out, it actually enhances your business. And my example to that is film. So it's probably tell you too much about me, but my favorite movie is Fletch. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I can recite that entire movie. I've watched it well over 100 times. I think it's the funniest thing ever made. And it came out in the 80s, and I saw that movie in the movie theater and loved it. And then it came out on VHS, and I bought that because I wanted to watch that on video. And then it came out on DVD, and I bought that because I wanted to watch it on DVD. And that came available on iTunes just as a download, and I bought it again because I love that content, right? That content to me is something I want to continue to consume, and so that as the way we consume content changes, I'm rebuying the good content over and over again so that I can still now consume it in the way I want to do it. Now, so I've got the movie on my iPad. So same thing. When I was at Alfred, you find that if you got a great piano method or drum method or whatever, and someone's been using it as a book, if they start to use it as an iPad, they'll buy it again to put it on their iPad. They'll want to so I don't think technology threatens that in the long term at all. And in the case of Hal Leonard and Alfred and Music Sales and some of those other companies that are really involved in music education, I mean, man, the rest of us should be pumping money into those companies. You know what I mean? Those guys are the ones creating our future customers. And so, we all got to be supporting the stuff that those guys do, because that's where all our future customers come from.
That was Brian Bradley summing up a great point about some of the fears I think music publishers have, and really kind of squashing them and saying,
yeah,
it matters. It really and it always matters, and it will continue to matter.
Definitely. And I would say most people probably think the way that he was talking, like, oh, well, now technology's out and who needs to buy books anymore? Like,
right.
But he makes a really good point. Like, you're always going to keep buying the same old stuff you have on the new forms of media. So
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well said. So now we have a special treat for all of those who stuck this one out and are still listening to the podcast. I think a great way to close this up is a familiar name. Perhaps you may not know the name Richard Sherman, but you certainly know his music. And this is a clip from Richard Sherman's interview for the NAMM Oral History program just a few years ago, where we got to sit down with him at the Disney Studios in Los Angeles and talk to him a little bit about his take on music publishing. Have you heard this clip?
I did, and I think it's just a small world that we're finishing off with it.
Oh, my goodness.
But,
wow. Okay. The puns are heavy today.
You know that he was just in the process of having a doorbell ringer with "It's a Small World."
Oh my God!
I just saw his wife's look.
That would drive me insane.
But how wonderful that he gets some royalties for that.
Well, yeah, and he talks about it in the interview about how it's the reason it's such like a new American standard is because it like worms into your brain, and that's what people love and hate about that song.
Well, how many times does it play when you're on the ride once? It's got to be like...
And if the boat stop...
you are stuck.
Well, doesn't he talk about that in his interview about how when the song was first put out, like you have to hit X amount of like plays with Disney before they consider it like a new American standard or something like that. And It's a Small World hit that like in a record amount of time just because of the rides in California, Florida, and then I think they were using it in a parade or something like that too. So he hit like the standards number, which is like thousands.
Yeah, well,
within like a week or something.
Yeah, you got to think about it. Like if that ride's running 12 hours a day, it's playing on repeat, not stopping at all.
Right.
365 days a year, you're going to hear a lot of "It's a Small World."
Well, it's also funny to me thinking about this guy because it kind of harkens to my favorite songwriter, Irving Berlin, who people would say, about White Christmas and God Bless America, they were sort of written on the fifth day or something like they've always been around. And that's exactly how I feel about almost all of his songs. I mean, Supercalifragilistic, the Tigger song, which he actually sings a bit for us in this clip coming up. These songs are just a part of who we are, and it's neat to think, this is the guy and his brother who brought them to us.
Yeah, I think that's super neat because it's, like you said, it's almost like a mythical status. Like it just appeared one day, but hearing the story behind it all, or in this case, hearing the voice, or if you log onto the website, seeing the face behind it all, it's just, I don't know, mind-blowing.
And, in a slightly different vein, but interesting to me that when I was listening to him tell this story the first time during the interview, I realized I always considered Walt Disney like Uncle Walt, like a member of the family. We're going to go and see Uncle Walt's place, and to here's a guy who worked with him and knew him and called him Walt, and so that was really another aspect of it that I think is really important to portray, and that is, this is the guy who lived that life, and these are the opportunities that he had, and in the end, what he was most proud of is the fact that he created music that we all know and hum along to and brightens our day.
And his brother is no longer living, correct?
That's right.
He's passed.
Yeah.
And is Richard, because you interviewed him last year, 2016.
Right.
So was he still working? Because you guys met at the studios.
Well, I think he came in. I don't know that he's officially working, but he's always doing something.
Right.
They're asking him to come back to do an anniversary of The Jungle Book, another movie that he wrote all the music for. And so as anniversaries come up and things like that, they commission him to write another piece or an update or maybe change the lyrics to include a celebration, that sort of thing. So he's still very, very active,
right?
Even though I'm sure he's well retired.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a real treat to get to know these guys, and I'm so glad that we could compile this podcast of music publishers and songwriters to give a little shout out to that part of the music products industry. A special thanks to Elizabeth and Mike for putting this together. It's always neat to hear these segments used in different ways. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Richard Sherman.
We didn't know this at the time, but Walt Disney was a great fan of Annette's. He used to listen to all her songs. And so we were asked to write some more songs for Annette, for her recordings. And so we did a number of big hits for her, Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy and Pineapple Princess, it was a big hit for her, and a lot of album songs that we had written, created songs for her albums. And not to our knowledge, Walt Disney was listening to all these songs. He liked our songs. And so one day she was going to do a film at the studio, and it was called The Horsemasters. And he said to the head of the music department, ask the Sherman brothers, those two brothers, if they want to take a shot at writing a song for Annette for this movie. So we didn't know it was Annette. We didn't know it was Walt that was sent the request. So, but the studio did, and we said, wow, sure, let's write it. So we wrote a little song called Strummin' Song, and we wrote it for her to sing in this little picture called The Horsemasters. And when we brought it to the studio to play for this administrator, he said, I like it, but Walt's got to hear it. He hears everything goes in. So he said, Walt who? He says, well, Walt Disney, of course. Who else? It's his studio. We didn't realize this, but we were going to have a meeting with Walt Disney himself. We were not prepared for that. But we said, well, shouldn't we get somebody to sing it? I mean, he likes to hear the raw material from the writer. So there I was, sitting and singing and playing Strummin' Song for him for the first time. And he liked it. And his comment was, yeah, that'll work. Now listen, he had mistakenly talked about a different picture when we first sat down with him. So he said, why don't you take a shot at writing this other thing since I wasted all my time talking about the wrong picture. So that happened to be The Parent Trap. We didn't know at the time, but he asked us to write some songs for that. So we wrote a song, brought it in. He liked it very much. He says that could be used in the love scene where they're singing about the scene. I need a title song, and we have a title called The Parent Trap. So we wrote a song called The Parent Trap, and we wrote another song for the two sisters who were plotting together to sing called Let's Get Together, Yay, 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 a little rock and roll song. And he liked that. But he never said anything like, I like it, or, gee, that's great. He'd always say, yeah, that'll work. Now listen, try this. And he started testing us, and then he gave us more assignments. We kept coming to the studio, and we wrote, I think we had about 6 or 7 songs accepted for productions. And one day he handed us a book. And the book was called Mary Poppins by Pamela Travers. And of course, he said, read this book and tell me what you think. He didn't say, I need a song for this, or I need a title for this. He just said, read this book and tell me what you think. And of course, the rest is history. We thought a lot of the book. We thought it could be a marvelous musical. And we came up with a lot of good ideas, I think. He liked them. He said, yep, that'll work. And eventually, we played one song. I remember we played a song called Feed the Birds. And we felt it was the theme of the whole movie, because the father was paying, in our story, the way we were telling it, was not paying attention to the children. They were becoming rowdy, and the mother was busy with a cause. We made her a suffragette, so she was too busy. And Mary Poppins comes in and teaches life lessons to the family, and that was the whole idea. Well, he liked our ideas for the story. He liked our songs, and when I played Feed the Birds, he said, "That's the whole story in a nutshell." I said, "That's right, Walt. That's what it is." Well, at that time we were calling him Walt. We used to stumble and call him Mr. Disney. He says, "No, don't call me that. Call me Walt." So finally we said, "Yes, Walt, that's what it's all about." He said, "Play me that bird lady thing again." So I played Feed the Birds for him again. I said, "How do you guys like to work here?" He said, "We love to work here. Are you kidding?" So he says, "Well, I got a contract for you if you'd like to become our staff songwriters." So he made our career in that one statement.
When we were talking about writing for the pictures and writing for assignments, is writing for cartoon characters.
Same thing. The cartoon characters are real people to me. Winnie the Pooh is just as real as Julie Andrews. I mean, I write for that character, and I don't think at all about whether it's animated or whether it's a live actor doing it. It's not important. It's the personality of the character. I remember we were working on the Winnie the Pooh stuff, and there's a character that we didn't write in the first little short film we did, but the second film had a little character who was a stuffed tiger. His name was Tigger. And right as soon as I heard Tigger, I said, "Oh my God, I got to write that." That's, it's just like it triggers something in you, and you just know. The wonderful thing about tigers is tigers are wonderful things. The tops are made out of rubber. The bottom's made out of springs. I mean, it just said it, yeah, that was Tigger. And that's what I mean, the thoughts that come out and the melodies go with it. That's how it works.
So that concludes our podcast episode all about music publishers.
We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.
This is kind of like
it was
harmonized.
Like,
That was
like a minor chord.